This is Defenders TV Podcast, episode 131, about The Punisher, Season 1, Episode 10, Virtue of the Vicious.
I hear a lot of people saying the blues, but I'm gonna tell you what the blues is. When you ain't got no money, you got the blues.
Welcome back, fellow Defenders, to Virtue of the Vicious, episode 10 of The Punisher. We are on 131 of Defenders TV Podcast. I am one of your hosts, John.
And I'm your other host, Derek. I'm getting used to saying that now. Unfortunately, we don't have Chris again.
We don't. He is currently being chased down by a pride of lions in South Africa.
I hope not.
I hope his little feet can carry him to safety.
Well, hopefully he'll be back next week to tell us all about his trip to South Africa. It looks awesome. I'd love to go on safari at some point in the future. He's been very close to elephants. He's been very close to some other creatures of the night in South Africa. Hopefully someday I'll get to do it. You've done it before, haven't you, John?
I have, yes. Fantastic. I always remember the guy at the camp that we stayed. We went on a canoeing safari in the Okavango Delta. And the one thing he said, talking about lions, elephants in heat, water buffalo, all these different things that you needed to do if confronted. And he always said about the crocodile, and you won't know until it's dragging you down into the water. Just as another camp person hopped along on crutches with just one leg. So I was like, okay, I'm not putting my hands in this water at all.
Yes, be very safe if you're out there. So you don't just come to Defenders TV Podcast for our thoughts on The Punisher. You come to us for some interesting stories about South Africa as well.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, other interesting tidbits that we can provide along the way. And if you're interested in our little tidbits, well, then you can come on over and subscribe, review, and share the love of Defenders TV Podcasts on any good podcast catcher. We are on Google Play, Apple Podcasts, and whichever podcast catcher you love to listen to podcasts on. Please, you can head on over to defenderstvpodcast.com and go to our subscribe section to choose whichever platform you want to listen to us on. And of course, if you want to speak specifically about the Defenders, the Punisher, Daredevil, Iron Fist, Jessica Jones, then please come on over and join our Facebook group over at facebook.com/groups/Defenders TV Podcast. And of course, you can like our page on Facebook as well.
And there's only 3 episodes left of our Punisher coverage after this episode. So if you want to get any thoughts into us, just make sure you send them into feedback@defenderstvpodcast.com. And you can record a voicemail for us over at defenderstvpodcast.com. If it's about the full season for our final episode, just say that in your opening sentence. And we will discuss it on our final episode, episode 13, coming up in the next couple of weeks.
Yes, come on, put those New Year's resolutions into action and send on over to us a voicemail.
Absolutely. And once we finish The Punisher, we will be moving on to the next Marvel movie, which is Black Panther, coming out in the middle of February. Really looking forward to that.
I'm looking forward to that loads.
Yeah, just watched the most recent TV spot trailer, which was really interesting to see. A bit more storyline for the character. This looks like it's essential viewing before we get to Avengers Infinity War during the summer. And before we get to Avengers Infinity War, we do have the second season of, well, definitely my favourite show. I think we all said it, the 3 of us, our favourite of the Defenders shows has been Jessica Jones.
Yeah, JJ is back.
Yeah, season 2 comes out in March, so looking forward to that.
But not on a Friday.
No, out on International Women's Day.
Yes, and of course there's no better day for it to air on.
Absolutely. Looking forward to seeing it. But John, should we get into this episode?
Yeah, Derek, what are some of the episode details?
Yep, this episode was written by Ken Kristensen, a first-time writer for The Punisher. This is his first full credit for an episode, but he is a staff writer on the entire season of the show, so has been in the writer's room for all the other episodes. I think you can tell that from this episode. Lots of interesting little tying up of bows that have been going on so far this season. It was directed by Jim O'Hanlon, a UK director mostly. He's done a lot of work on UK TV, directed the first 2 episodes of the excellent BBC show In the Flesh. Cool zombie story taken from a very different perspective. If you have the chance to check it out, definitely watch that.
Yeah, absolutely loved that. And of course, it was up north.
It was, yeah, a really good show. Check it out. He also, great timing for this episode.
It is,
yeah,
yes.
He also directed next week, the January 19th episode of the wonderful, would you call it black comedy series?
Definitely.
Inside Number 9, with the characters created by Steve Pemberton and Rhys Shearsmith from League of Gentlemen, another show we absolutely love. This season has been very interesting. First episode, okay, pretty good. Second episode, probably one of the best things I've seen on TV for a long, long time. And now we're coming up on the third episode, Once Removed, which is out next week, directed by Jim O'Hanlon. So we've chosen a really good week to do this episode.
Yeah, definitely. And Jim does not disappoint in this episode either.
All right, John, do you want to tell us what he gave us with your synopsis for the episode?
Sure. Detective Brett Mahoney interviews Paige, Madani, Russo and Senator Ori individually to determine the proper sequence of events surrounding an assassination attempt on the senator. Each interviewee recounts the attack from radically different perspectives. 6 hours earlier, after learning that the mercenaries who killed Stein are connected to Anvil, Madani confronts Russo at the hotel where his men are providing security for Senator Ori, as he sits down for an interview with Paige. During the interview, Lewis, who previously infiltrated the hotel after killing one of Russo's men and stealing his uniform, barges into Ori's suite with a gun. Castle arrives and shields the two from the gunfire, only for Lewis, who is wearing a suicide vest, to take Paige hostage. Castle then flees when the Anvil agents open fire on him. Fighting off Russo, the Anvil agents, and several N.Y.P.D. officers, Castle confronts the tortured Lewis in the hotel kitchen before helping Karen disarm the bomb. Lewis Wilson retreats to the freezer, locking himself in as he rewires the bomb and detonates it, killing himself. With Frank now as the major suspect in the assassination attempt and the NYPD closing in on the kitchen, him and Paige fake a hostage situation that allows Frank to escape the hotel by zip wire. Whee!
That was a very interesting shot at the end of the episode as Frank uses his zip wire to get across the street.
Absolutely laughed my not too insubstantial man boobs off. I have to say now, I just thought it was really funny. It reminded me of like sort of adventure weekend or adventure week with school back in the day, where you'd do the zip line and it'd be like, oh wow, this is really cool. But just to see that he had set that up in anticipation. And absolutely, in terms of the character, he's not going to get himself into a situation that he can't get out of.
A beautiful line by Karen Page.
Yeah. Really, it sums up that execution of a plan and a strategy from a military perspective. And I loved it. But I was expecting him to kind of like go wee. It kind of reminded me of Boris Johnson sort of stuck on the zip wire.
Right,
I was like, was he going to suddenly get caught? He hadn't got the tensile strength sort of across the span. But I mean,
stuck in between two buildings in New York, above the street, would have been quite hilarious. Definitely. I had a little bit of the South Park ziplining episode, if you remember that one, John, where everybody's encouraged to shout "zip line, woo" as they go across it.
Exactly.
I just can't expect that from Frank.
It was just really, it felt really funny.
Can I say it did? If he was in a Batman costume, it probably would have suited Batman, definitely. But yeah.
But it would have been at night as well, so it kind of would have looked like he was flying through the air. Very true, very true. But it does show Frank's upper body strength, given how many bullets he took to his flak jacket, you know.
And there is that moment that he pulls himself out of the lift with both arms, even though one of them's been hanging at his side for a while. Like he pushes through the pain in this episode.
Oh, big time. But I think with that, we can push through to the War Journal. This week we're taking a slightly different perspective on it, in the same way that I think the episode did. We're going to look at the different interviews of Detective Mahoney with Senator Ori, Karen, Dinah, and of course Russo, as well as then looking at the final aspect with regards to Lewis and Frank, which these four interviews all related to.
Yeah, Yeah, interesting one. Let's go for our point number one, our case note number one, for the intro and Senator Oris's version of the story. It's often said that someone's the hero of their own story. None more so than Senator Ori in this particular version of the story. I love the laugh from Karen later on when she hears how he's described the situation where he picked up a gun, shot back, and ran out of the room. And Karen's kind of going, there is no way that happened with this guy.
I believe she calls it total unadulterated bullshit.
Mm-hmm. Yes. But his version of the story is very melodramatic. He does create this narrative for himself that he's the hero in his own story. It's quite interesting, though. We've heard the last two episodes, and in this episode as well, we see Senator Ori wanting to take away guns completely from certain people. He's very hard line on his stance, his anti-gun stance. But we do get a little bit from him where he's going, I've never been in a situation like this before. Is he questioning his position on this? I don't think he'll ever change his position because he still has to go to that rally, but it feels like when he's having the conversation with the returning Mahoney, Officer Mahoney, that we've seen right back to Daredevil Season 1, cool to have him in here. It seems like when he's having the conversation with him about, have you ever been in this situation where you've been shot at? Because I haven't. It feels like he has a new perspective on his opinion, at least.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, he talks about he's never held a gun before until today. What does that do to him? Has he suddenly felt like he's got immense power by holding it and firing it in the way he describes his story? Yeah. But, he also says how it played so fast and now it plays like slow motion.
Right.
That kind of change because of the adrenaline coursing through his veins. So it's really interesting, but I wonder how much now we will see of Ori. I think that this may be his last moment within this series. Yeah. But it's really interesting, having the conversation that he talks about society being safe enough and that the police should protect him, and yet in the interview that he has with Karen Page, he's got private armed detail with the Anvil boys protecting him. So it's kind of interesting that what he's saying and what he's doing, there is some slight contradiction there in how he's trying to run that narrative.
Yeah, and that's definitely on purpose in the show. It's interesting that he did say pretty much exactly what we said last week, that our kind of position on gun control is we don't have guns in Ireland and the UK. We don't use them on a day-to-day basis, so we kind of feel that society is set up with responsible people in control of those guns. And that's very much exactly the point that Senator Ori makes here. He says, why do you carry a gun, Karen? That's what the police are supposed to do. So it's quite interesting that he's coming from that perspective. I do wonder if being in a situation just like the situation that caused Karen to buy her own gun to carry around in her bag, is that now where Senator Ori is? He's never been in the situation before. Now that he is, and goes, being a high-profile politician means I'm going to have to be surrounded by people holding guns, or get a gun myself, because I'm going to be attacked again in the future. Is this now changing his position? I don't know whether we'll ever see him again, because the threat of Lewis is gone now, unless Lewis has inspired other followers who will carry on his so-called mission.
Yeah, I mean, it will be interesting to see how that plays out, or if it even does. This idea of followers of Lewis. I mean, that is kind of an interesting thought that could be put into this. But I suspect now that we are definitely going to see the fallout from this episode between the main characters.
Definitely, yeah, totally agree. The one big difference in Ori's story from everybody else is he involves Frank in this attack, saying that Frank was working with Lewis, which is the believable narrative that the newspapers and the press have created. But he's the only person that specifically mentions Frank comes into the room behind Lewis and the two of them are working together. Everybody else sees it completely differently. So I think that was quite interesting from his point of view.
It ultimately starts the conversation that this was a pincer movement up each of the stairwells. One side was Lewis, one side was Frank, to execute their plan to assassinate him as well. But in the end, it's himself running to get help. Whereas it looks like, I suppose moving into point 2, we see that he just seems to barge Karen out of the way so that he can get free and escape. Yeah. Here we come to Karen trying to just smooth out those peaks and troughs of Senator Ori's bullshit account of what happened. But nonetheless, Karen, in her own way, adulterates the truth of the situation.
Absolutely.
I think in particular, the really interesting one is that Frank does the hero dive to take the bullet. I mean, this is classic Kevin Costner bodyguard, jump in front of the bullet.
Absolutely.
And I think that's purposeful. That's really, it's so interesting. She is seeing this as, that Frank is the guy who is honest. He is doing stuff for good reasons, and that he is selfless and will do the right thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's an interesting point that you make, that Karen has seen this from her perspective, and from her perspective, Frank is the hero. It was quite interesting, this discussion between herself and Mahoney, because it really helps her conversation, and really helps the scene, actually, that Mahoney is someone that she's known now for 2 years, probably, if the timeline is right there. About 2 years, maybe a little bit more. She's known him for a long time. He worked the Punisher case back in season 2 of Daredevil, so he knows what Frank Castle is really about. Behind the headlines, behind the news coverage, behind even the court case, he knows what Frank is about. And I like that this is used by Karen to kind of try and exonerate Frank again. That is her purpose here. But it's kind of interesting that she doesn't really mention much of the Lewis storyline. Doesn't really mention much of what Lewis did when he came into the room. It's very much, she's standing in front of Mahoney and going, drop this bit about Frank and focus on Lewis, because he's the only one here that's the bad guy.
Yeah, I mean, she really focuses on and pleads that Castle is not a terrorist. And really that, if it wasn't for Frank, her and Ori, Senator Ori, would be dead.
Yeah.
So it is total, the hero moment of Castle here. And again, trying to, in some ways, bit by bit, piece by piece, restore Castle's reputation within the eyes of the law. And she is the one that connects Mahoney immediately back into, the events of Daredevil series 2 as well. So it's really interesting how that plays out. But I think you get the sense towards the end of this episode, when Mahoney is with Karen, that he knows that she is effectively bigging up Frank here. Because as you say, she is completely ignoring Lewis, really, within the story that she's trying to say.
I like the reasoning that Mahoney gives for that, is that she's writing her column. In her head, she's already writing her story for the front page of the news the following day, and Mahoney's kind of going, I'm trying to investigate it. I don't want to read it on the news tomorrow. I want to hear it from your lips right now in this room, so I can do my job and I can investigate. And Karen is kind of keeping back some of those details so that she can write her version of the story. Like, nothing better than a journalist to be right in the centre of the action. I do like that answer is given as to why she's holding back some of the details, even if it's not true. Yeah,
and I mean, Mahoney here is saying, just give him up. Give us the information that you know about Castle. And, he's really almost as well saying that to some extent she could be considered as in contempt of any investigative procedure that the N.Y.P.D, or even if it was in some way brought to court, because she is not giving away any information. She is withholding or he feels that she is. And her response back is, if Castle's a terrorist, I'm just a victim, that she would play it in that way. And I think it's really interesting, and I think this moves us on to point number 3, that with Dinah Madani and her story, there is that moment where Paige and Madani cross paths here. Yeah. And it is a really nice moment where she confronts Karen, that she knows, Madani knows, that Karen lied to her in that office at the Homeland Security Agency when she asked Karen whether she knew that Frank was alive and where he was. I thought that was really interesting. And the comeback from Karen is really good. Well, we both knew that he was alive.
Exactly, yeah.
It wasn't just me. And I think that does lead to a really nice moment with these two ladies as well, where they go, and Frank has saved both our lives. The idea that Frank pulled Madani from the burning car crash and the wreckage of it. And of course, Frank has also, saved Paige's life as well. Yeah.
And I like the fact that Dinah is now telling Karen that she is the one and the best hope for Frank to survive. I don't know whether she gives Frank enough credit, because I know these are tough guys who work for Anvil, and I know there's tough guys with Rollins and with Billy Russo, but Frank's a tough guy. He's been able to fend off a lot of people, so I don't know whether it will convince him too much by saying, come to Dinah, she has all the answers for you, she'll take you into protective custody. I have the feeling that even if she did, he'd still have to fight his way out of it.
I mean, I think the great thing about that moment where she hands Karen the card and says that is a reflection of her conversation with her boss at Homeland Security, where effectively, that conundrum is that he is one of the two people, along with Micro, that can absolutely provide the truth behind what happened in Kandahar and with Operation Cerberus about Rawlins and the bugging of her office. Yeah. All of that, which she tells her superior. And so it'll be interesting. Is he a good or bad guy as well? It'll be interesting. He took that bug. I'm kind of like going, maybe you should have kept hold of that, Dinah.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, it's a reflection of that conversation where, he points out to Dinah that you now need to try and keep alive one of your key witnesses that everyone else is trying to hunt down. On the basis of, his front cover page with Lewis in the bulletin that he's a terrorist, and obviously, I suppose later on with this assassination attempt and how that is at least initially being taken up, whether that's the final version of it, don't know, but this is a real conundrum for Madani, because she needs the one person that every other law enforcement agency is hunting down and who thinks is a terrorist.
And you've got to assume that even though we don't get to read the story, we don't get to actually see the actual wording of the story, you've got to assume that the way that the press is taking this is Frank Castle, who broke out of prison and was a terrorist and brought to court a year ago or so, that he's now back and he's now convinced another young member of the army. So the way it's probably taken is that Frank is the leader here. He's the most likely one to be responsible for this. Not Lewis. This isn't Lewis's plan. This is Frank's plan, I would say, is the way that they're going to take this in the press. So, of course, if you are in the NYPD, it would be a much bigger collar for you to get Frank and not Lewis. If you lose Lewis, hey, who cares? He's just one young kid. If you get Frank, you get him on all of the previous things that happened. You get him on the court case, you get him on the breaking out of prison, and you get him on this. So I can understand why Mahoney's pursuing it, but I love the fact that they've used a character that knows Frank and knows what happened in the past. It's not just some other detective in the NYPD who doesn't know anything about Frank.
Absolutely. I think what's really good here as well is that we have the third interview that Mahoney is doing here with Dinah Madani, and it's the third version of the truth of what happened. And, Madani herself is lying here as well. I think initially, there's a bit of a pissing contest between the fact of, Madani as Homeland Security. Why is she being called in? Why is she there? Mahoney wants to know, and he is NYPD. And to the point where Madani is quite, look, here's my badge, I'm going to leave now. She kind of pulls, my agency is better than your police force to an extent.
A little bit.
But ultimately, what happens in that stairwell during the sort of fallout of the assassination attempt, she absolutely covers up from Mahoney. She has had a truth revealed to her here, which she is the one that wants to pursue it, and she's not going to allow any other law enforcement agent to be involved in it. And I find that really interesting as well. You do get that. I think you had that with Luke Cage to some extent, where you had the FBI involved, but also Misty Knight was, a local detective in the neighborhood who wanted to make sure that she was the one that was following up and trying to find out the events going on in Luke Cage. So this is another element of that, I think.
Good call. Let's talk about our fourth point, the interview with Russo. So Russo is probably what you would call the hostile witness here. Of all of the people.
Big time.
Everybody tells their version of a story here as to what went on, but the actual discussion between Mahoney and Russo, I think, is fantastic. I love the acting in this scene between the two characters. I love Russo again in here, kind of again clashing up against somebody else that wasn't in the army. This idea of, did you ever serve, to Mahoney, where he's going, we in the Marines believe you can lose somebody on a mission, but if the mission is a success, then it's a success. We expect for people to die. And here he's saying this mission, his mission to protect Ori, was successful because Ori is still alive. So it doesn't matter that he's lost 4, 5, 6, 10 guys. That doesn't matter. In this situation, he's won. His agency comes out on top. These guys have given their life for Ori, and that's what they're paid to do. So that's quite interesting, where he's looking at it from that perspective. But he's really challenging and really pushing back against Mahoney.
Oh, definitely. I love Mahoney's response here, where, I wear a shield. His is about the badge of the N.Y.P.D. And I think there's a similar kind of reflection here. It becomes very much this butting of heads of, the shield of the N.Y.P.D. versus the gun and service of the Marines, in the same way that Dinah and Mahoney really, there is that Homeland Security and N.Y.P.D. Again, butting heads here, but definitely Russo is absolutely again the hostile witness here, and again makes a porky pie.
Absolutely, but I do like the little play on words here between Mahoney and Russo. Don't know whether you noticed this, John, where he says to him, have you ever served? And Mahoney says, I wear the shield. On the badge of the N.Y.P.D. is to protect and serve. So he's effectively saying, I didn't just serve in a war. I didn't just go over and do a couple of tours of duty. I serve every single day, and that's what's written on my shield. That's what's written on my contract that I sign as a police officer for the N.Y.P.D. is that I serve. That's effectively what he's saying. I serve the people, not just an army. So nice little play on words from the writers there.
Definitely, but here we have Russo covering up the fact that actually Frank has informed him that Lewis is going to make a play against Senator Ori, and Russo does nothing to prevent that.
It's interesting,
or to assist to allow Frank to come in and stop him.
Yeah.
And ultimately, this becomes the moment where Russo really unravels himself over the course of the events, because that moment in the stairwell where you have Frank, Russo, and Dinah Madani, immediately after that, I was thinking, why did Russo kind of give himself up here?
Yeah.
Why did the truth come out on that stairwell? Why did he say to Madani, it was war, Dinah? This really blowing his cover. And that's because he shot Frank. Frank knew that Russo knew that he was going to be there to try and save Ori. He asked for Russo to help with that. And in the end, Frank finds that it is Russo that has just shot at him in the stairwell, under the pretense that he's trying to protect Madani.
Love the reaction of Frank to that shot, just as he realizes that's Billy Russo, his friend, who has just spoken to him on the phone earlier on that day saying, I can protect you, Frank, and now is taking a shot at him and won't stand down. It's a great little moment. That whole moment on the stairs is fantastic. But there's a couple of moments throughout the episodes, two specifically. One after the conversation with Frank on the phone, and this moment with Madani where he reveals himself, where you get that really cocky smile from Billy Russo. He just smiles to himself and to the world to effectively go, I am pretty evil here. I do understand what I've done here, and I believe I'm in the right. I think the smile after the call with Frank, I feel that that's because he believes in his Anvil men and thinks if he can lead Frank into that room and let Frank think that he's on his side, that his men will get the shot and kill Frank.
Definitely.
He's set up this whole operation in the hotel that if anybody comes into the hotel, they will be taken out by his guys. Anybody that doesn't belong there will be taken out by Anvil. So I think he feels a bit overconfident in his own men. And then the smile on the stairs, I think it's just before he gets taken down that he smiles at Madani, and that seems to be, she's found out and I've got a gun trained in her. I'm absolutely going to get the shot off before she gets shot off back on me. And then he gets taken down. So
yeah, but it's interesting, of all the four interviewees that Mahoney is talking to, it is the lie that Russo gives in his interview with Mahoney that he has never seen Frank, he's not been in contact with him, that ultimately comes back in that stairwell to really bite him in the ass, because he did know that Frank was going to be there, and Frank knows that, and that is the issue. And I have to say, there's no sweeter justice than that happening, to be honest, to Russo. I have to say as well, given we see Madani earlier on in the episode going back to work for the first time, and that knowing nod of the camera to Stein's old desk.
Yeah.
I absolutely love the fact that when they're all getting arrested by the N.Y.P.D. and Frank's making his escape, Dinah turns to him and says, "You're going to wish you shot me."
Oh, yeah.
She's got the fire in the eyes now, and that's going to be pretty special to see that retribution, I think.
Absolutely. Can I ask just one question about the stairwell? Again, I've only held a gun when doing practice on a gun range, but what I've been told is you never put anything in front of a gun after it's just been shot because it gets quite hot. Is what I've always been told. There's a moment here where Frank walks up to Medina directly after she shot the bullet into the stairs and puts the gun directly to his head. I was waiting for him to move away from it and see a big burn mark on his head afterwards. Would that be right, John? Would that be?
I don't know, to be honest. No, don't know.
Never put a gun to my head just in case someone's finger slips or something like that. You never want to do that.
No, absolutely. But I think one final thing with Russo is, Madani her suspicion has been raised about at least Anvil. Russo makes the pleading case that, he hires these people, it's nothing to do with him, but that the files on the 4 men that were shot in that sting operation do show that an affiliation with Anvil, and it's all of them. So her suspicions, do get raised here for at least Anvil, but there is a bit of I really liked the acting in that moment where she and Russo are talking in the lobby of the hotel, because she really does look across his face, you see her trying to analyze it. I just thought it was so well done.
Yeah, it's kind of have I been wrong about you all this time, even though we've been in those really close moments for this many episodes, even though they've been this close, could she have been wrong about them this long? And there's one other person that doesn't get to be interviewed by Mahoney, obviously, for obvious reasons, as we see as the episode fully plays out. I really liked how this episode played out, I must say. I didn't, the surprise, I suppose, of how it all ended. But there's Lewis, obviously. There's this character of Lewis who's finally reaching the crescendo of his storyline. But it all starts out with him going over to one of the Anvil guards at home, shooting him through the door. Nice touch that he's using the bulletin to cover up his face and shoots the guard through that because of how angry he is at the bulletin for what they've done and how they've changed his story and how they've twisted what they did. It's just a nice touch because it just shows how angry he is at Karen. I'm surprised he didn't put a bullet in her head the minute he arrived into that room, because it does seem like a lot of his aggression is about that Karen has taken a side, and it's not the one he expected or wanted her to take, but now she's an enemy. I expected for him to just kill her, take her out, and then take Ori as the captive, and then set his bomb and his plan in motion.
But that's it. That's an interesting point, because I actually did feel that Lewis going in there, it was just going to simply be bang, bang, and you're dead. And I really felt that both for Senator Ori and for Karen, he completely hesitated. I don't know whether, as you say, did he intend on taking a hostage? I'm not too sure that he did. He is wired up, and maybe that was a backup play. Did he intend on doing that in that way? For me, in looking at how he executed the Anvil guards and going bursting in there with the stun grenades and the explosives to break down the door, I really thought he was going to go in and it would be a shot to the head to Ori. I thought that was going to be the statement, and the same with Paige. Yeah. And he absolutely hesitates here for some reason, and maybe that is because he was going to take a hostage.
Yes, possibly. He does take a shot, though. There's no doubt in that, because we do get that from Karen's story, that he takes the shot and Frank dives and blocks the shot. Whether that's exactly true or exactly what happened. But yes, he doesn't kill either of them. Ori gets out of there and Karen is taken hostage to get him out of the building, it seems like. So it doesn't look like he's a suicide bomber. It looks like he was trying to get out of there, but was willing to kill himself if it came down to that. Is kind of where we get to.
Yeah, and I mean, ultimately we find him there in the kitchen of the hotel, holding Karen hostage, with a release detonator, so that if he's shot, it will release and explode. And it's really, it's actually really quite upsetting. You know, he finds himself, in a sense, cornered as far as he's concerned. And he starts recounting it's ruinous to run from a fight, wait for support, wait for support. And he's kind of recounting all this. He's trying to, he'll get support from the army. It's almost tragic. Well, it is tragic.
It is, yeah. Because it's actually rolling his life back to the first time he entered the army and the first words that were spoken to him to get him into this situation where he's able to put up with killing people.
Yeah, and he speaks to Karen, you could have been part of the solution and you went against me.
Yeah.
He's really now in this position where it's desperate for him.
Yeah.
And as you say, it's recounting it through, and he's projecting onto Karen that you aren't part of the solution, you didn't help me. He's waiting for support, it's not coming. It's ruinous to run from a fight, to get himself perked up so that he can fight, because he is in a kitchen with nowhere to go, with his hand on a detonator that if it releases, he is going to blow up.
I have to also say the talk down that's going on with Frank talking to Karen through his conversation with Lewis about which wire to pull to keep herself safe. You assume if someone's building bombs, like Lewis has many times now, that they build them the same way every time. The white cable is the one that controls whether it goes off or not, just like it did with Curtis's one the previous time. I like how it's done. I love that Karen saves herself effectively in this situation because Frank has been able to give her the information that she needs to get herself out of the situation. I just think it's really smart. It's very, very smartly written and very smartly played between the two characters.
Yeah, absolutely. I really enjoyed how Frank was using his conversation to really tell Karen, get the white wire, you've got a gun in your bag, and ultimately it works out. But Lewis retreats into the pantry, the locked pantry or the freezer. It's really interesting. Was Frank trying to talk him down or not there? I mean,
it feels like in that scene, because it's a very intense scene, but you're right. It does kind of feel like Frank is saying, go ahead and do it to him. Which is kind of a Punisher thing to do, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely.
It feels like something that the Punisher would do. He wouldn't kill him himself, but if the guy's willing to take himself out, well, go right ahead. No skin off Frank's nose. And then that problem's out of his way.
Yeah, but I mean, unfortunately, it is the tragic ending of Lewis Wilson's life. He's gone down a course of action that has led to him being alone in a hotel freezer or pantry, wiring himself up to explode. I think one of the saddest moments as well, that really makes that hit home, is the fact that, when him and Frank are talking, Frank says, think about your father. He's going to have terrorists written on his house. And you see Lewis going, leave my dad out of this. That moment where he becomes a son, he becomes, that kid that, and has that relationship with his dad. And it all just feels so really tragic, and it's really quite powerful. But ultimately, Lewis goes boom in the pantry.
Yes. Oh, but it's a tough moment to watch. And as you say, that moment where Frank talks about his father is probably the most difficult moment of that with Lewis, because it feels like he hasn't thought about it, despite the fact that that's exactly what happens to the family members who are left behind after something like this situation. It's a fabulous scene, though. Yeah,
really. It is really good.
Yeah, really sad. But yes, Frank escapes by using Karen again. Can I ask a question? Because I think there's a problem here in the episode.
Okay.
I'm always asking you questions, even though you saw the exact same episode that I did. So Karen shoots Lewis in the foot.
Yes.
With her gun in her bag.
Yes.
Where did she get that gun? Because we know at the beginning of the episode she has the conversation specifically with Russo that she's lost her own gun. He says, you'll get it back when you come back downstairs. But she never goes back downstairs after the interview with Ori. That's where she's attacked in the room by Lewis and then taken captive by him and brought downstairs in the lift, and then Frank goes after him. So there's no real opportunity for her to have taken a gun. Again, it depends on whose version of the story you got here. So is it the gun that Ori picked up in his version of the story to shoot back at Lewis? Is that what Karen picked up and put in her bag? Maybe. It's quite difficult here because of the unreliable narrators that we've got going on.
Yeah, but does Frank know that? And I mean, we do see on a number of the different narrations that are done that Ori leaves with the gun.
Mm-hmm.
So it could potentially be some kind of continuity error.
Possibly, because Frank is saying to her, "You're a creature of habit, Karen," and she starts patting her bag for her gun. So there is that moment. So it feels like it should be her own gun in that bag, but we know from that conversation that's very specific from Russo earlier on that she's a gun carrier. She won't get her gun back until after she's finished the meeting with the senator. So just wondering if you thought that was unusual that she had the gun in her bag. But there are explanations in the story where it could have come from, I suppose.
No, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, we get Zipline Frank.
Well, we do get one other thing beforehand. We have Frank and Karen in the elevator, and I was looking at the screen going, ooh, Matt Murdock's not going to be happy about this. There is absolutely a moment where these two characters are definitely getting very close to starting a relationship.
I actually thought the way Jon Bernthal played that was exceptional, because he had on his face an expression of absolute longing to want to kiss Karen,
right?
But realizing that it would ruin everything, or that, you know, maybe the memory of his wife popped up during that moment. But I thought the eyes in particular that Jon Bernthal had, because actually, yeah, it's Karen who kind of steps back.
Yes.
I thought it was really, really well done. You know, and I'm so glad they didn't kiss.
Yes.
But that possibility that they could have kissed and didn't, I thought was so well acted.
Yeah, I agree.
By those two in the elevator, and especially with Jon Bernthal. It was almost just like the pain of it, that he can't have a normal relationship anymore because of what he's committed himself to do, despite being so close.
And sold in a look, as you say. It does have that feeling of if they were locked in the lift for a little while, or if there was a bottle of rosé in there, maybe, they may have pursued it. But I'm glad they didn't. But I definitely, watching it, I was going, Matt's going to be unhappy if he ever finds out how close this happened with this game. But we'll find out. We know that Karen thinks that Matt is no longer around or no longer in the picture. So it'll be interesting to see if this continues. It'll be interesting to see if we have these two together again. It ends with Karen talking to Mahoney saying, "I sincerely do not know where Frank Castle is." So maybe we won't see her in the series again. This feels like the wrap up of the Lewis storyline. Kind of takes out the Bulletin connection, but we know that Frank cares for Karen, so he'll see her again at some point in the future.
Yeah.
No big notes for this episode, but I do kind of think this is the most Punisher-like episode of the show. I know Chris had mentioned a few times, and we've talked about this before we recorded, John. Chris talked about a few times that the show doesn't have that many Easter eggs for comic books in general or for particular storylines, but this feels like the most comic book Punisher we've seen, really, in the show. He's able to cover himself up and get into this building to take out his target like Lewis, and able to find his way out at the end with his zipline. But he's also able to do some quite incredible things, as I say, being able to pull himself up on top of the lift with one broken arm, or one arm that's been shot. That's quite a significant Punisher-type move. You'll never get this guy down. The moment where he has a standoff with the Anvil agents, with Lewis and Karen in between them, and the minute they walk away, Anvil pull out their guns, shoot him. He rolls across the floor, grabs a body of a downed Anvil agent, and drags it behind him as it's being shot to protect himself. Like, these are all Punisher moments. They're not just moments from drama shows.
Like, he takes a lot of bullets in this episode.
Mm-hmm.
Like, in that elevator at the end, I was kind of thinking, how is he going to pull himself up?
Yeah.
How is he going to hold himself up on the zip line?
Yeah.
You know, like, he takes a lot of beating, a lot of punishment, and that is very much Punisher as well.
Yeah.
You know, and he has that strength to overcome the pain because of that bullet lodged in his brain.
Oh yeah, that's the bullet hole that was revealed in his the X-ray in season 2 of Daredevil.
Yeah,
wasn't it?
absolutely.
Yeah. Interesting, nice. No, good memory, John. Good memory. On that note, I think we need to get on to our defends for the episode. John, do you defend the 10th episode of The Punisher, Virtue of the Vicious?
I do defend this episode of The Punisher. I would give this 5 zip lines out of 5.
Oh, yeah.
I really love the 4 different narratives of the events that go down in Senator Ori's hotel room. I think it's really interesting. I love the fact that each one of them, in their own way, for different reasons, provides a lie, and of which one really comes back to bite them on the ass, and that's Russo. I find it an interesting way that Russo is revealed to be one of those bad guys from Kandahar, but I love the fact that it is predicated on his lie to Mahoney about having seen Frank. I think it's really good. I think there's a really good wrap up of a number of different story threads, in particular the Lewis one.
Oh, yeah.
And just how tragic that is. Yes, it's extreme, but these extreme things have happened, and I think it's a really good way, from having seen in the previous episode, that mirror of Lewis as another different version of how Frank could have gone, and what he's doing, to see here that those final moments are between Frank and Lewis. I think it really, Lewis, that moment where he says, "Don't talk about my dad," is massively heart-wrenching, to be honest. Especially given that he then goes and blows himself up, especially after recounting all the stuff he's been taught in the army. It was pretty tragic, that, but I really liked it, and I absolutely loved the kahunas that Dinah Madani shows here when she stands up to Russo to say, "You should have shot me. You are going down." I like this, and I'm really excited to see how this pushes now into the final 3 episodes. I mean, for me at this moment in time, I really don't think the Punisher has had a dud episode. Episode 1 was very much an opener and very standard, but I think, we have to be mindful that not everyone knows about the Punisher. It's a nice introduction, but I'm really excited to see episodes 11, 12, and 13 as we move towards the end here. And I'm wondering, will, at least for me, the Punisher break that duck that Chris has always said about having that lull moment within these 13 episode series? I personally don't feel that that's really happened yet. I've been absolutely hooked on the way these stories have strung together through the series, and then how in a particular episode like this episode 10, you have that really nice structure to the episode of the 4 different narratives, and yet ultimately going, well, which Frank do you want, almost to an extent? Terrorist Frank, hero Frank, doesn't exist Frank, and doesn't exist in an evil way Frank, Madani trying to protect her case, or Russo trying to make sure he gets his kill of Frank. So I absolutely defend this episode of The Punisher. Derek, do you defend Virtue of the Vicious?
You had a lot to say there, John, and I don't have a huge amount more to say. This is an excellent episode of this series. I had a chat about this kind of point of the season with one of our friends over on Twitter, Lauren Galloway, the other day, where she feels that a lot of people have slept on this series. A lot of people haven't watched the series because nobody's talking about it. That is the challenge with a lot of the Netflix shows, that people can watch it in a day and then they just won't talk about it again. This does seem to have slipped under the radar a little bit, but I absolutely feel this episode and the last couple of episodes, there's some Emmy-winning performances in here. There's some fantastic moments. Jon Bernthal's killing it, and I'm so sorry to have lost Daniel Webber as an actor on this show, but it's very important that his character of Lewis gets to this end point before the series ends. You can't have had this big of a climax in the final episode of the series as Frank's taking down his other enemy in the show. It's good that it's come this way. It's good that it's filled up the middle of the series. And as you say, John, over and over again, there's been wonderful episodes in the show. What I love about this episode is the change of structure. You can't do this every episode, of course, but I love the change of structure here where you have 4 different perspectives trying to tell one person who's just looking for the truth, and none of the 4 perspectives are correct or are telling him the truth. All of them are unreliable narrators. All of them are trying to protect themselves in the situation, or in the case of Senator Ori, taking the opportunity to make themselves look like a hero. You know, I really like those ideas. I really like how it came off in this episode. And I do feel really sorry for Mahoney, because has he come out of it with enough information to follow up on anything at all here, or does he just have to close the case and go, well, I was told that Frank wasn't involved in it and Lewis is dead now, so does it really matter? I do kind of feel sorry for the character Mahoney, not for the first time. He's kind of been screwed over a few times in the Defenders series, but really good to see him back in the show as well and connect it all back up in the universe of the Defenders.
Okay, so next on to some feedback that we've gotten in through Facebook. Remember, you can head on over and join our Facebook group over at facebook.com/groups/Defenders TV podcast. Mm-hmm. And as we said earlier, if you want to, please send in your thoughts, discussion points, or comments on any episode of The Punisher by email through feedback@defenderstvpodcast.com. Leave a voicemail through our website over at defenderstvpodcast.com. But our first bit of feedback comes from our Facebook group by Robert Phillips. Finally, the threads are woven together in an explosive episode that underlines a few of the morals of this tale. Mm-hmm. The heroic self-sacrifice line stays clear through Lewis, a trope I'm growing to hate more and more, and the good guy Frank is in lights for saving the day all around. Billy gets uncovered, and Madani sets her sights on the real baddies. Really good talk down scene again with a trio and a bomb. I particularly like the way Karen saved herself despite being damseled by the terrorist.
Very true.
But where next? Can Frank find Micro and cook up a plan to take Rollins down? Can Madani destroy Russo without killing him? Can the rule of law return to New York for just one episode and the baddies are arrested and tried? This episode a week thing is a killer now.
We're so sorry for that, Robert. Thanks so much for your feedback. As always, great to hear from you. It's tough, isn't it? This is probably the longest we're going to spend on one show, just because of the situation, just because of when it was released, and with the holiday period, and with a couple of holidays for some of our hosts. So this is the longest we've spent with a show. I'm really enjoying it. Just like the way I watched Homeland when it came out first, or the way I watched Lost. It's a week-to-week show for us now. At the first time we've done it, we used to have 2 episodes a week and start off our show with 3 or 4 episodes out in the first weekend. It's probably a little bit long because we know that the tail on it's not like that for a lot of people, but we can see from our downloads that people are just joining us now and have watched the first 4 or 5 episodes over the Christmas break.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. We have taken the Netflix model of the series dump on a given day, and we've turned it into the new Netflix experiment, which is Star Trek Discovery, by going week by week.
Yes.
It's kind of really interesting. The 2 different approaches that Netflix are taking here. I'm totally with you here, Robert. The episode week by week really is a killer. I suspect you may be one of the only listeners that is doing it week by week. However, I am sure most people are already through the 13 episodes and are maybe now watching it again, possibly. Mm-hmm. But certainly, yeah, it really is a killer.
Yeah. Well, what I do like about the podcast is that at some point in the future, there's going to be people that will come to the show for the first time. So it's good to be able to cover these just one episode, each episode that we discuss. So you can pick it up whenever you want to as you watch the episodes along. Thanks so much for your feedback as well, Robert, itself, the actual feedback about the episode. I'm glad you enjoyed the episode as much as we did. It seems you're looking forward to the next couple of episodes coming up. And totally agree with you. I did say it in the podcast itself that I like that Karen saves herself. I like that she's not just a damsel in distress in here and saved by the Punisher. He's saved enough people in the building and obviously Senator Ori by his actions. So it's nice to see somebody else being a bit of a hero, even if it's just saving themselves.
Yeah,
Just another quick piece of feedback from Jeff Childs. He says, I'm really enjoying The Punisher, but I'm not sure what purpose Lewis serves in the series. Is it just to be a contrast to Frank? Robert responded to this one as well, said, good question. To me, I think it's a story that takes almost the same notes and plays them differently to show how it might have been with a tweak and a wobble. I think it's also an adversary for Frank that isn't an enemy to develop our understanding of his sense of honour further. And Rebecca also replied saying he's a fake Moon Knight. Which isn't true at all. Lewis does have mental problems, but not in the same way that our favourite Moon Knight character from Marvel Comics would have dealt with the situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is a really good question, Jeff, because I know there's been other people as well that have asked that question, you know, that they've found it difficult with Lewis's storyline. I think what I would say is, yeah, as Robert said, you know, it's not a contrast to Frank. It is a mirror of Frank. And I think in particular for episode 9, you get that moment where you have to try and distinguish what are the differences between the two. For one to be reviled and one to be seen as honourable, particularly by the different characters. In particular, Karen, you know, why is it that she goes against Lewis but stays with Frank and is loyal to Frank? Same with Curtis. It's the different way the notes are played, as Robert has said. It's also how a similar situation is viewed differently by the characters around the two as well. Yeah. That's how I kind of take it. Absolutely. Is that it's more of a reflection of Frank, a mirror that even he has to determine, am I just like Lewis in what I'm doing? Yeah. Which I think is most clearly seen in episode 9.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I mentioned earlier on in the season that the big problem, I suppose, with Frank Castle as a character is that he's not a very open character, I suppose. In his discussions, he's quite a quiet character. He doesn't say a huge amount of words. So the character was always going to be defined in this show by the people that surrounded him. And I think the choice of using Lewis in here is a great idea. I think Steve Lightfoot, the showrunner, had a really good idea of what he wanted to get across with this show. He seems to be coming from the attitude of, we're not just making a show to have a show on Netflix, to just fill up the hours to keep people involved. We're going to make something that means something in the future and can be talked about. I'm delighted to be able to talk about the show the way it's been put together. And I love all these different perspectives of people that have come back from war and the impact that the war has had on them and the impact that their time serving the country has had on them. And I love Lewis as a character particularly. I think I've called him out almost every episode he's been in as being one of the features for the episode.
Absolutely.
So, it's been great.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, how some people just fall through the gap that is of support that is there by voluntary groups, official groups, or whatever.
It's not like nobody tried to save Lewis.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
There's many opportunities there to be saved, but it just looks like he wasn't able to be saved in the show. Thanks so much for the feedback. Really good to hear from you. We've only got another couple of episodes left to get your feedback in. As John mentioned, just email them into feedback@defenderstvpodcast.com or join us over in our Facebook group. And we will have a new episode out every week for the next couple of weeks.
Absolutely. And please subscribe to the podcast, rate us, leave a review on any of your favourite podcast catchers. 2018 is all about sharing the love of the Defenders and Defenders TV podcast. Sharing the podcast is really good for us, and any feedback is more than welcome. You can head on and subscribe on Apple Podcast, Google Play, or any podcast catcher of your choice. Just head on over to defenderstvpodcast.com and to our subscribe section, and you can choose from a huge range of podcast catchers.
A smorgasbord.
A smorgasbord, indeed. And we will be back with our review of The Punisher, episode 11, Danger Close, next Friday, the 19th of January, and then every week from then on in for the remaining 2 episodes.
Thanks so much for joining us. We'll be back again next week. Looking forward to talking. I hope you're enjoying listening to our discussions about The Punisher as much as we're enjoying talking about them. And we'll be back with our third co-host, Chris, next week, we hope.
Yes, unless he's been devoured by a meat-eating rhino.
Oh dear, I hope not.
Yes, I hope not too. As always, it has been a pleasure speaking with you.
Thanks, John.
Absolutely. And with our listeners, obviously.
Okay.
And yes, I'm off to go
zip line.
Zipline John. Exactly. We will speak with you again next time.
Bye.
Bye.
I hear a lot of people saying the blues, but I'm gonna tell you what the blues is. When you ain't got no money,